Hello students, I am Dr.Karabi Ganguly, Head of the Department of Biomedical Engineering, JISCE College of Engineering, Kolani. Today, the topic of my video lecture is heart, its location, size, and structure. Heart is a highly muscular organ, and it is the central pumping organ of the cardiovascular system. It is hollow, sac-like structure and made of cardiac muscle fibers. The heart works throughout the life. Spontaneously, it generates rhythmicity or rhythmic pulsation by subsequent contraction and relaxation. And this contraction and relaxation repeated by phase and thereby originates the pulsatile pumping action of heart. It functions as the body's circulatory pump and propels blood, which provide oxygen and nutrients to body tissues, to various parts of the body, to various organs. It actually receives deoxygenated blood through the veins and delivers it to the lungs for oxygenation before pumping it into the various arteries. As we can see, it is having a cone shape, and the pointed end or the part which is at the pointed downward, that is called apex part of the heart. It is having the size of a closed fist, and it is the most important organ of the blood vascular system. Now, location of this important organ. It is located in the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity is the upper part of the diaphragm. Diaphragm is the cartilaginous flap which divides the body cavity into two major parts. The upper part is the thoracic cavity and the lower part is the abdominal cavity. Human heart lies little to the left of the midline of the thoracic cavity, with its point extending downward and to the left between the 5th and 6th ribs. It actually resides in between the lungs and posterior to the sternum, that is breastbone. Now, the covering of heart. Covering is essential for this sensitive, important organ. And from outer side inward, we can see three major covering. The outermost covering is the pericardium. Inner to pericardium lies myocardium, and the most inner lining is the endocardium. Pericardium is having again two sublayers. One, the outer parietal pericardium and the inner visceral pericardium. In between these two pericardium layers, there lies pericardial cavity, which is filled with pericardial fluid. which acts as the shock absorber and lubricant, because lifelong heart pumps blood and it functions lifelong. Now, if we look at the pericardium can be divided into two parts, fibrous pericardium and serous pericardium. Again, fibrous pericardium can be subdivided into parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium, what we have already discussed. So these are the threefold covering of this major organ: pericardium, myocardium, endocardium, starting from outside inward. Now the gross anatomy of the heart. Heart is a muscular organ which is having 4 chambers, 2 upper chambers, 2 lower chambers. 2 upper chambers are right atrium and left atrium, which are separated by interauricular septum. And the lower 2 chambers are right ventricle and left ventricle, which again are separated by interventricular septum. Now, the auricles are having relatively thin wall and act as reservoirs for the blood entering into the heart. Both contract at the time, filling the 2 thick muscular ventricles rapidly. The lower chambers or the ventricles having thick muscular wall compared to atria, because these 2 lower chambers are actually propelling blood throughout the body, through each and every organ, and it is also propelling the blood against the gravity. So these 2 lower chambers having thick muscular wall. Now, each auricle opens into the ventricle of its own side through an auriculo-ventricular aperture or the opening. And these 2 apertures are guarded by valves which open only in the ventricle and make the blood flow unidirectional. That means blood will flow from auricles or atria to ventricles only. And these valves at the junction of the atria and ventricles prevent the backflow of blood from the lower chambers, that is ventricles, to the upper chambers, that is auricles or atria. Now, these 2 apertures are girded by 2 important valves. One is bicuspid or mitral valve at the left side, and the next one is tricuspid at the right side. We can see several blood vessels which are entering the heart, and again major blood vessels leaving the heart. The blood vessels which are actually entering the heart, one is superior vena cava, and the next one is inferior vena cava. And these 2 enter the right atrium. Again, the major blood vessel which leaves the blood, which leaves the heart, is the aorta and the pulmonary artery. So from gross anatomy of the heart, we can see this is the aorta, the major artery, which again having branches. One is brachiocephalic trunk. Second is left common carotid artery. Third, left subclavian artery. Now this arch part is the aortic arch. Now there are several vessels, blood vessels, along with superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, which also enter heart. And important one is pulmonary vein. These are the left pulmonary veins and these two are the right pulmonary veins. Now, heart itself needs oxygen and nourishment, and that is supplied by these right coronary artery and left coronary artery. Next is the external structure of heart. If we externally have a look, we can see these major parts. These three branches already we have discussed: brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid trunk, left subclavian artery, which are the arteries coming out of the aorta. Carotid artery actually is responsible for the circulation of blood to brain, neck, and face. And subclavian is responsible for supply of blood to thorax, neck, arm, head, shoulder part. And this brachiocephalic trunk and aorta, arch of aorta, these are actually supplying to brain or the upper part of the body, and also having the branches to distribute blood to various important organs of the body. Now, we can see the major chambers, 4 chambers: right atrium, left atrium. This part is the left atrium, which is marked here by red color. And this is the right atrium part, upper chambers of the heart. And these two are the lower chambers of the heart. This is the right ventricle and this one is the left ventricle. Here we can also see the distribution pattern of the left cardiac vein and also the left pulmonary veins, which are draining blood to left atrium. Pulmonary trunk, that is the branch coming out of the pulmonary artery, left pulmonary arteries and right pulmonary arteries, which are moving out of the heart. All the arteries always move out of the heart, and these, especially these two pulmonary arteries, left and right, propel blood from heart to lungs. And the major aorta, the biggest artery of the human body, it is responsible for circulation of blood throughout the body. Mainly oxygenated blood is circulated through aorta. Now the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, these two are draining blood in right atrium, and pulmonary veins are draining blood to left atrium. So this is the view from outside. So the external structure of heart is shown here. Now the internal structure. If we have the transverse section of the heart, we can see the opening. This is the superior vena cava, which opens in the right atrium. And this is the inferior vena cava, also opening in the right atrium. Now, this is the junction of right atrium and right ventricle. And here is the aperture. Here is the opening at the junction of right atrium and the right ventricle, which is girded by a valve called tricuspid valve. Now, in the left-hand side, this is the left atrium and left ventricle. Again, there at the junction, there is the aperture, which is girded by bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Now, the opening of the pulmonary artery, which is coming out of the right ventricle, is having another semilunar structure called the pulmonary valve at the base, and also the aorta, which comes out of the left ventricle, is having same type of semilunar valve at the base of the aorta. We will discuss later the function of these valves. Now we can see the thick muscular wall of the ventricles or the lower chambers of the heart. This is called three-layered covering: the epicardium, the muscular thick wall, myocardium, and the innermost endocardium. And inner to that, there is thick lining, muscular lining in the ventricles, which is called papillary muscles. Now, these papillary muscles are responsible for the forceful contraction of these lower chambers. These two lower chambers or the ventricles are separated by these interventricular septum. And the papillary muscle, these muscles are called papillary muscles, and these muscles actually hold the tricuspid and bicuspid valves at their position, and also prevent these valves, this valvular structure, from damage, because there is continuous blood flow forcibly, which is propelled by this pumping organ, and there may be any damage due to the forceful propelling of this blood, continuous flow of this blood, which is actually girded by this papillary muscle and these thread-like structures, which are called chordae tendineae. These are the thin structures, thread-like structures, which are tightly tying this tricuspid and bicuspid valve with this papillary muscles and prevent any kind of damage during forceful blood propelling. Also, we can see that there is septum in between the upper chambers, that is atria, and this septum is called interatrial septum or interauricular septum. Now, this is the overall internal structure of heart. Now, we will discuss the major blood vessels leaving and entering the heart. First of all, we have to divide the heart into two sides, left and right. Left side is responsible for the circulation of oxygenated blood, and right side is responsible for deoxygenated blood circulation. Now, if we have a look, there is left atrium, left ventricle. In between these 2, there is bicuspid valve or mitral valve. Again, pulmonary vein. Pulmonary vein, that is the exception vein bringing oxygenated blood from lungs to heart and drains the blood in left atrium. If we see these oxygenated blood after draining, it moves to left ventricle, and from left ventricle, it moves to aorta. It moves to aorta and is circulated throughout the body. Now, at this junction, that is the atrium, left atrium and left ventricle, there is a guide called bicuspid valve. Again, when from ventricle, the blood is moving to aorta, at the base of the aorta, there is a guide called semilunar valve or aortic valve. Now, when we are talking about the blood circulation in the left side of the heart, we are always talking about the oxygenated blood circulation. And for this oxygenated blood circulation, the major blood vessels which are involved, number 1 is pulmonary veins, right pulmonary veins and left pulmonary veins, which are bringing oxygenated blood from lungs to left atrium of the heart, and that oxygenated blood moves to left ventricle. From there, through aorta, it is circulated throughout the body because it is the oxygenated blood which supplies oxygen and nutrients throughout the body to each and every part of our body system. Now, this left-hand side of the heart is totally separated from the right-hand side. If you can remember, I have discussed already the upper chambers, that is the left atrium and the right atrium, are separated by interatrial septum or interauricular septum, and the lower chambers, which are the left ventricles and the right ventricles, they are separated by interventricular septum. So the left-hand side of the heart and the right-hand side of the heart is totally separated either by interauricular septum or by interventricular septum. So there is no question of mixing of oxygenated blood with deoxygenated blood. Now, the major blood vessels which are leaving and entering the heart in left-hand side section and are responsible for the oxygenated blood circulation, I have discussed. Now we are moving to the right-hand side. Now, in right side of the heart, we are having right atrium and right ventricle, and at the junction, we are having tricuspid valve, which is girding the blood flow from right atrium to right ventricle. And the major veins, that is superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, are bringing blood from the upper part of the body and lower part of the body respectively. And obviously, this blood is deoxygenated blood. And these two vena cava, that is the biggest vein, drain deoxygenated blood in the right atrium. Now, from this right atrium, deoxygenated blood moves to right ventricle. From there, it is circulated to lung. It is taken back to lung for further oxygenation through left pulmonary artery and right pulmonary artery. That is the pulmonary artery. Now, pulmonary artery is circulating or propelling deoxygenated blood to left and right lung respectively through right pulmonary vein and artery and left pulmonary artery. Now, these four, that is pulmonary artery, left and right, and superior vena cava and inferior vena cava, these are the major blood vessels which are entering the heart and leaving the heart and are responsible for the circulation of deoxygenated blood. And as the heart simultaneously is pumping blood, oxygenated and deoxygenated, through these major blood vessels, either they are leaving the heart or they are entering the heart. So the right hand side and the left hand side of the heart is totally separated by the septum, either atrial septum or ventricular septum. Again, the major blood vessels which are bringing blood to right hand side and propelling blood from the right hand side of the heart are totally responsible for the circulation of deoxygenated blood, and the major blood vessels which are bringing blood to the left hand side of the heart and propelling blood from the left hand side of the heart are responsible for the oxygenated blood circulation. Now, for this very important function, that is, there must not be any way mixing of this oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, septum is functioning and taking important role, and also the valves which are acting as the girds at the junctions also play important role. Now, there are four important valves in the heart. Number one is bicuspid or mitral valve, which is present at the junction of the left atrium and left ventricle and is responsible for the propelling of blood, oxygenated blood, from left atrium to left ventricle. It makes the blood flow unidirectional and prevents the backflow of oxygenated blood from left ventricle to left atrium. Now, it is present at the left side of the heart at the junction of the left atrium and left ventricle at the atrioventricular aperture. Now, tricuspid valve, this is present at the junction of the right atrium and the right ventricle. It is also propelling the blood from right atrium to right ventricle and makes the blood flow unidirectional and also prevents the blood flow from right ventricle to right atrium. And it is responsible, as it is present in the right hand side, so it is responsible for the circulation of deoxygenated blood. Now, two other valves. One is aortic valve, another one is pulmonary valve. Aortic valve is present at the base of the aorta and pulmonary valve is present at the base of the pulmonary artery. Now, these two valves are having, say, same type of shape, semi-lunar shape, that is half moon shape, and is termed as semi-lunar valves. Now, as they are valves, they are also performing the same function, that is propelling the blood in maintaining the unidirectional flow and also preventing the backflow. Now, aortic valve makes unidirectional flow from left ventricle to aorta and is responsible for prevention of backflow from aorta to left ventricle, and it is bringing the blood from left ventricle, so it must be oxygenated blood. Now the pulmonary valve, it is also performing the same important function. It is propelling unidirectional blood to pulmonary artery from right ventricle and also preventing the backflow of blood from pulmonary artery to right ventricle. And as it is propelling blood from the right ventricle, so it must be deoxygenated valve. So in nutshell, these valves are the girds or acting as the entry doors, which actually making the blood flow unidirectional and prevents the backflow of blood. Now, what we have seen from this today's lecture, that heart, it is the pump of the circulatory system. It is at the center of the cardiovascular system, muscular, hollow, pumping organ, and is responsible for propelling blood throughout the body. So it is its important responsibility to propel blood to each and every corner of human body, so that it could transport nutrients and oxygen through this blood, and which will be propelled through the blood vessels. And again, when there will be the incorporation of the waste materials, then that will be again drained to heart and will be sent to those organs which will be responsible for elimination of all those waste products. Now, we can see from this picture that it is acting as the central organ, pumping organ, and it is propelling blood. Either arteries, which are marked in red color, through it is propelling blood. So all the arteries are leaving the heart and propelling blood to several organs. And all the veins, which are marked in blue color, are bringing blood from various organs to heart. And all these red color marked arteries are responsible for the circulation of oxygenated blood, except the artery which is bringing blood to lungs. So this is the exception. Whenever pulmonary artery is bringing blood to lungs, it is deoxygenated blood. Other than this, all arteries are bringing blood, oxygenated blood from heart and propelling blood to various organs. And in this side, that is blue color marked veins, all are bringing deoxygenated blood from various organs of the body and drain in the heart, except lungs. Pulmonary veins are bringing oxygenated blood to heart. This is the exception. Now, whenever we are viewing this peak, we can see the right-hand side of the heart is having blue color because it is responsible for the circulation of deoxygenated blood, and the left-hand side of the heart is responsible for the circulation of oxygenated blood. It is the only muscular organ which can generate pulsatile movement, which can generate rhythmic pulse by contraction and relaxation. Again, in turn, phasic contraction and relaxation, and acts as the central pumping organ of these high network of circulatory system. Thank you.